Welcome back to the book log. Today I am going to be talking about Dreamcatcher by Stephen King. As usual, there will be spoilers in this review. I've read a lot of Stephen King books now, and it's always funny to see how my experience with the book stacks up against what I perceive to be the general consensus of a book. Dreamcatcher is, generally speaking, one of the most highly criticized, highly derided Stephen King books out there. If you look at Stephen King book rankings, it's typically near the bottom, and from what I've seen, the reason it's so divisive has to do with the plot. I'll explain it more in depth in a bit, but the gist of it is that aliens come to Earth and implant people with these slimy weasel aliens that come out of your butt. Shit weasels, as they're called, are kind of a punchline because, to be fair, it's a completely ridiculous concept on its face. These are things that I knew before having read it, and I'm bringing up its reputation like this because I find myself in an interesting position. I actually agree that this is one of Stephen King's weakest books, but I feel that way for an entirely different set of reasons. I like the poop aliens. Think about how genuinely terrifying that concept is for a second. That's really effectively weird and scary and unsettling. I think the bizarre alien drama is cool and interesting, and this book has a lot of insane ideas in a way that's endearing to me rather than annoying. My problem with the book is that it gets all the cool stuff out of the way in the first act, and then the entire last 2/3 of the book, which amounts to like 400 pages, are just incredibly boring. Now I'm going to get into some more specifics, starting with the characters and the setup and some of the things that I actually enjoyed about the book. The story centers on these 4 lifelong friends, Henry, Jonesy, Pete, and Beaver, who all grew up in Derry, Maine, which is a fun bit of classic Stephen King interconnection. There are a couple references to it, but other than that, it doesn't really factor in much or have any bearing on anything. These 4 guys have been friends since elementary school. Now they're in their mid to late 30s, and each year they get together at Beaver's dad's cabin for a hunting trip. They each have their own problems going on. Henry is a psychologist who has lately been dealing with a lot of depression and suicidal thoughts. Pete is a car salesman who is also a struggling alcoholic. Beaver is kind of a drifter who can't maintain a relationship, and Jonesy is a school teacher who was recently severely injured after getting hit by a car. For some additional background context, this was the first book Stephen King wrote after the time that he almost died getting hit by a car. He's clearly drawing from his own experiences for all of these characters, but especially Jonesy in terms of the literal pain and suffering and emotions of recovering from this sort of traumatic accident. The other thing to note is that one day when these 4 were kids, they rescued this boy with Down syndrome named Duddits from a group of bullies. Duddits has some psychic powers, and ever since that day, these 4 friends have also shared their own minor psychic abilities as well, like knowing where things are, slight telepathy, precognition, that sort of thing. So the annual hunting trip is already underway when things start going wrong. Jonesy and Beaver are staying together at the cabin when Jonesy almost accidentally shoots a lost hunter who stumbles onto their property thinking he was a deer. They bring the guy inside, and it quickly becomes clear that something is deeply wrong with this man. He's obviously sick with something that is causing constant belching and farting with an overpoweringly foul smell that Stephen King describes as being mixed with ether and banana. I didn't just bring that up randomly either. It's described multiple times throughout the book. This guy is disoriented. His memory seems to be missing the last several days. His belly is really distended. They lay him down to rest in the guest bedroom, and when they go back to check on him later, there is blood on the bed and a trail of blood running from the bedroom to the bathroom, where it becomes clear that he is shitting something out. And that something turns out to be the aforementioned alien shit weasel. On its way out, this thing destroys his body and kills him. Then it turns around and kills Beaver, which was a very shocking early book death for me. So all that's going on. And then at the same time, Henry and Pete are driving back from a beer run when they nearly run over this woman who is just sitting motionless in the middle of the road. When they go to investigate, she appears to be suffering from this same bizarre affliction with the disorientation and the farting, followed by deadly body-destroying shit weasel. Again, I understand that this whole thing sounds stupid and ridiculous, but when you actually sit and think about it, it is genuinely freaky to me. Like, again, just imagine that happening to you. I saw an interview with Stephen King about this book where he said that the bathroom and things of that nature are one of the last unexplored taboos in fiction and art, and I think he's right, and it's a part of why I actually think this section of the book is so effective and so legitimately scary. It's too intimate to even talk about for most people, and yet this is where these characters are getting brutally killed. Just thinking about it feels so uncomfortable, both physically and psychologically, and again, you can almost through the pages feel the real physical discomfort Stephen King was experiencing when writing this. Like I said, I actually really did enjoy this part of the book, which is essentially the entire first act, first 200 pages or so. Unfortunately, the book is over 600 pages long, and from this point forward, it dramatically slows down for me, and I'll try to explain why. First, the plot and the thematic through line he's trying to do are both a complete mess. I'll start with the plot part because there are a few interesting elements to it, but it's just way too long and way too boring. It turns out that these aliens operate through microscopic spores, basically like a parasitic fungus that infects human beings and in some cases incubates inside the body into these shit weasels. This is called the virus, which literally just rhymes with virus, and before it kills you, it gives people psychic abilities. Infected individuals can read minds and whatnot. This is where some of the alien lore comes into play because apparently the United States government has known about these aliens for many years, like ever since Roswell, and now that this infection has broken out in rural Maine, the US military has completely quarantined the area. We are introduced to several Army personnel characters, most notably Colonel Abraham Kurtz, who is a complete hard-ass lunatic G.I. Joe general type of guy, and they're planning on wrangling up any hunters in the area who may have been exposed to this deadly and communicable virus and just killing them. One of the aliens ends up somehow taking over the mind of Jonesy, and for the rest of the book, he is helpless to watch as this alien creature just takes full command of his human body. I will admit, I did find parts of this dynamic to be interesting, although it is a concept Stephen King has utilized before better in books like Drawing of the Three, but there's a whole subplot of Mr. Gray, as Jonesy calls him, slowly learning about and beginning to appreciate and even revel in the discovery of human emotions and human experiences like eating food. Also, he's called Mr. Gray because these aliens look like the standard pop culture gray alien. The plan is that Mr. Gray is going to take this dog that's infected with the virus shitweasel and drop it into the Quabbin, which is a big reservoir that supplies all the drinking water to the Boston metro area in the hopes of infecting as many people as possible and, I guess, prolonging their survival as an alien species. That is another thing I thought was somewhat of an interesting take on aliens, which is that in this book, the aliens are a dying species, and they technically came to Earth to get help, only to be met with this intense military aggression. There's a kind of creepy recurring event where the aliens send us voice recordings saying things like, "Help us, we're not infected, please," but they somehow use famous Earth celebrity voices in the recordings, like Bill Clinton and Sarah Jessica Parker and Brad Pitt. Anyway, that's enough props. I now have to talk about what specifically didn't work here, and I would say there are two glaring issues. The first is Duddits and the whole Dreamcatcher thing. Even ignoring the fact that the way Duddits is written as a character with Down syndrome is just bad, the character itself is totally superfluous and unnecessary to the way the book unfolds as a whole. The main characters rescued him from bullies as kids, so they are bonded through him, but the telepathy they get from him ends up being redundant because the aliens also give that. So by the end of the book, he really serves no function except as a way to shoehorn in this Dreamcatcher concept, which is confusing to the point that I think it's just nonsense. There's a literal Dreamcatcher in the cabin, like the Native American object, but also, like, Duddits is their Dreamcatcher in some metaphorical way. As best as I can tell, the Dreamcatcher is meant to represent a kind of psychic construct born out of their childhood friendship with Duddits and his psychic influence, where memories and emotions can be stored or hidden or protected or something. In the section with Jonesy and Mr. Gray, while Mr. Gray is in control of the body, Jonesy is locked in a literal mental room where all his memories are in file cabinets and whatnot, which is another similar idea to something that comes up in the Dark Tower. I guess maybe it's supposed to be a metaphor for, like, the inner worlds people build to survive pain. Not sure, though. It's never clearly defined. It's inconsistently applied, and it mostly seems to exist as a vague plot device that approximates the shape of an explanation rather than actually being one. I don't know, it just feels like a very half-formed concept, despite the fact that this is ostensibly what the entire book is supposed to be about. It's called Dreamcatcher. And on top of all of that, what was to me by far the most glaring issue with this book was the pacing. The entire last act is just this incredibly long chase sequence where the Mr. Gray Jonesy hybrid are driving down the road with the sick dog to try to infect the water, where they're being chased by Henry and Duddits and this other military guy, Owen, who themselves are being chased by Kurtz and a couple other military guys. This literally goes on for hundreds of pages, jumping back and forth between the different cars as these guys are driving through Maine. It was just an absolute slog for me. Also, it was difficult to visualize how far apart they were from each other at any given moment, so it was hard to gauge the stakes, and I don't know, I just really struggled to care about any of it after a while. As you can tell, I obviously have very mixed feelings about this book. I think there are a lot of Stephen King books out there that get a bad rap and end up being better than their reputation suggests. This, to me, was not one of them. Like I said, though, there are things to like here. There are a lot of cool ideas, a lot of genuinely effective horror. Again, I like the poop aliens. I would go so far as to say the entire first act is genuinely great, but it feels like it loses focus too quickly and becomes this really frustrating mix of both confusing and boring. There's a good story in here somewhere, maybe a novella or something, but to get there, you need to trim like 65%. As usual, though, I'm glad I read it. I'm going to get through all of these books someday. I'll probably give Dreamcatcher like a 5.